In today's show, it's a mock draft. It's a Dynasty Startup Mock Draft. First one of the season. Michael Bolton, you excited?
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com. And you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_Beeble, on TikTok at redrock_Beeble, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We are available on all platforms. So, as I said, it's a mock draft. We are going to do, of course, redraft mock drafts. That was hard to say. We're going to do those coming up in the next few months, but it's time for a Dynasty Startup Mock Draft. I'm going to be joined by Matt Lawson of Fantasy Basketball International. You know him as NBA Dynasty ADP, one of the people that's done the most in the fantasy basketball industry to push forward the popularity of Dynasty leagues. So we're going to do that. It's a 25-round mock draft. It's 12 teams. You know that I think that's 250 players rostered is an absolute minimum for a Dynasty League. We're going 300 deep here. We are also going to be using my idea of roster settings that I'm going to implement in the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. 3 guards, 3 forwards, a center, a guard center, a forward center, I think it is, and a utility. And theoretically, if this league was to play out, we'd have games limits per position, 4 per position per week, which is, again, if you go back and look at my How to Set Up a Fantasy Basketball League video that I did earlier this week, or maybe last week, you'll see my explanation for that. But those settings are going to be introduced in this. Not that it makes a huge difference. It's 10 starters. It's 15 bench. It's a Dynasty 9-cat startup draft. We're going to get into that in a second. But so I don't interrupt the flow of the mock draft, I'm going to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel, it's time for you to get involved in betting on taking your first swing, in fact, at Major League Baseball. You can get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. If you just bet $20, you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 that you can spend betting everything from the money line. You can do over-unders. You can bet on who's going to hit the first home run. You could bet futures like the World Series after today's Major League Baseball trade deadline. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. And don't forget to gamble responsibly. All right, we might as well bring Matt in here, then we can set up this mock draft. So I'll go get him. All right, we'll get him. Here he is. The legend, Dynasty legend, Matt Lawson. Welcome back to the show.
Josh, thanks for having me back. You know, we did one of these about a year ago, and I actually listened back to it earlier today. And I got to give you credit because with your first 2 picks, like the legend that you are, you take Tyrese Halliburton at number 9. Great value. Now his dynasty value has risen significantly. And then you got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander coming back at 16. Which ends up being the steal of dynasty startups this past year. We'll ignore the part of how high we took guys like Robert Williams in that draft. Some of the other pitfalls. And let's be honest, my mock draft team that starred Cat and Zion, it was tanking for Wemby last year.
Obviously,
but there was a lot of gems in that mock draft episode. I think we did a pretty good job, but we're going to do even better tonight.
I don't even remember taking that. I know that I was higher on Shai than almost anybody last year and got a little bit scared off with a knee injury, but I didn't realize I'd had him that spot. So I'm pretty happy with how that ended up. And now I'm probably going to end up being lower on him than most others this season. I think, especially for a redraft where he seems to be going at number 3 in a lot of different drafts. I think I'm probably going to end up being a little bit lower there, but we are doing a Dynasty Startup Mock that's starting in a minute. We might as well bring the draft screen over so that people can see, because Fantrax has updated their system. Now, just a quick warning to anybody who's drafting on Fantrax, please do not use that rank to sort your players, because it makes no sense. They've got Anthony Edwards ranked at number 1. They've got Steph Curry ranked behind Spencer Dinwiddie at number 34. None of it makes any sense. So sort by ADP and you'll get a better idea of where players sit. Yes, it's obviously not Dynasty ADP. Sorry for using the pun of your Twitter username there. But you got to make sure you sort by that. Do not sort by score. It doesn't make any sense. Do not sort by rank. It also does not make any sense. So yeah, I will praise Fantrax a lot, but I'll also shit on them when they're wrong, because they're wrong in this situation. So we are getting ready to start. We're waiting on one person to join. I might, before you make your pick, Matt, I might just pause it to see where Jason is and if he's jumping in. I hope he is, but we're almost full here, and I just want to get a full mock before we get going. Who are you taking at 1, though? Just give us a bit of a spoiler.
Yeah, so for the last 2+ years, I've had Nikola Jokić at number 1 in my dynasty rankings, and I'm not changing that. I think there's a lot of reasons for it. Obviously, he's been number 1, or in this past year, depending on what you're looking at, what kind of scoring settings, tied for number 1, right around there in fantasy rankings, and it's the consistency. And it's the fact that, his style of play is going to lead to a longer prime, I think, than a lot of big-bodied centers because he kind of plays a ground-bound game. We're not looking at a guy who's depending on explosive athleticism to be able to generate his production. And I think we're going to have an extended run with Jokić as an awesome fantasy player. A lot more years that look like this past year and the year before that. And I'm glad to take him at number 1 and gives me the flexibility to do whatever I want from that point onward.
Yeah, it does. And I think one of the things that can be hard for people to not necessarily understand, because that sounds stupid, but it's more that he doesn't have to be the number 1 player this year or next year or the year after, or really in any year in the next 4 years. If he is the number 2 player every year for 5 years, that's worthy of a number 1 overall pick. It's the same as Dončić has never been a top 3 category league player. That's fine. But if he's the 6th best player for 10 years in a row, it's probably worth it to take at number 2. I think that's one of the hang-ups people have, is they view it as in a little bit of a redraft lens of if you aren't at that exact rank position, then it's a failure.
Yeah, I think that the important thing is that you're getting elite level production, and those guys at the very top, that kind of top 5 production, those guys can be worth twice as much than players who are just a little bit further down from them in the rankings. So if you're taking someone there, you need to either believe that they're going to give you that kind of elite top 5 level production in the immediate future, or that it's coming very soon after that. So that, we'll get a little bit into that with Victor Wembanyama, but if you're going to take Victor, top 3, top 5, you need to believe that he's going to be that kind of elite fantasy producer up near challenging for the top spot in the rankings year after year. I think he will be, and we'll talk about that more, but that's the kind of production that you need to be getting when you're taking a pick at the top of the first round in a dynasty startup draft.
Exactly. We're just waiting for one person to join here, so I'm just going to hit pause on this recording. All right, we're back. We've got our draft ready to go, so let's hit the unpause. Matt, you are on the clock, and you're about to draft Big Chungus, I'm guessing, here at pick number 1.
Correct. We're going to take Jokić here at number 1. And I feel like I can go in any direction from this point. If I want to go younger, I can do that. If I want to have a more win now build, I'm ready to do it.
Yeah, so who's going at 2? Is Dončić going at 2 in every startup dynasty? That's who I've seen in everyone. He just went here at 2 as well.
Yeah, that's the common selection. I mean, some people are desperate to take Victor, who just went at number 3, and sometimes you'll see that pop up, but most of the time it's Luka.
Is there any argument for Victor not to go at 3? Because this is the exact 3 that I would have at the top of a draft. I did a startup not long ago and took Wemby at 3 there myself. You seeing Shea go at 3 in some situations, or Halliburton even? Who else is going at 3 if it's not Wembanyama?
Yeah, you could see Shea or Halliburton. Those seem to be the next 2 that most people are interested in, but Victor's going most of the time at number 3.
Yeah, I don't really see an argument not to do that again. He's not going to be the 3rd best player this season. He's not going to be the 10th best player. He might not be the 20th best player. That's all well and good, but you are getting a guy who's probably going to be a top 4, top 5 guy for 10 years, and if not more. So that's what you do. So Tatum at 4, LaMelo at 5. There'll be a lot of people who are watching this who aren't necessarily dynasty people who go, LaMelo, guy can't stay healthy, he's trash, he's no good. That is a relatively common pick, though, in that spot.
Yeah, I think LaMelo is getting underappreciated right now after kind of an injury, bad luck season.
I agree, and that is exactly what I would do. But very interesting to me that Shea has fallen to 7. Shea's going to go higher than this in redraft leagues, but he's down all the way at 7 here. Halliburton 6, Shea 7, Cade 8, Anthony Edwards 9. It's going to be for my pick, so I'm going to have a think about it. What do you think of the order of those selections there and how that's played out?
Yeah, I don't understand Shea falling all the way to 7. I just think even if you think that the steal rate and the block rate aren't sustainable, they're still strong enough that he could have top 5 production this year, and he's 24 years old.
It is my selection now. What am I going to do? I've got a risky pick that I might make. I'm going to take Chet. All right. I'm going to take Chet. How is that controversial?
Chet goes, once you get outside of the top 10 or so, Chet can fall anywhere in there. It's not unusual. I think that he could easily be upside for this year, a top 25 player if everything goes right, just because he's going to play probably a more conventional center role, and that's just going to lead to great fantasy production, and then the sky's the limit from there.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I think that there is that. Has he got top 5 upside? I don't think so, but multiple top 15 seasons is possible for Chet. I think people forget about just how good as a prospect, especially as a fantasy and dynasty prospect that he was before last season. Is it a little bit risky for me to take him there? Yeah, sure. But the other guys on the list, Steph, there's Embiid. Jaren Jackson has his own injury concerns and is 4 years older than what Chet is. I think he's 4 years older than Chet. So I was okay. No, he's not 4. He's actually 3 years older than Chet. So, it's back to me. I better make a selection here. What am I going to do? So I've got Chet. So that's obviously skewing my team a little bit younger. I have got, what am I going to do in this spot? Now, how young do I want to go here? I don't think I have to go. You know who I'm going to do? I'm going to take Trae. Why am I going to take Trae Young? I'm going to take Trae Young. I don't love it. I don't love that pick, but I think, again, that getting a high-level assist player who's going to be doing that for a very long time is quite valuable.
Yeah, I think getting points and assists early in a dynasty startup is so essential. It's hard to find those players as the draft goes on, and it takes a lot to acquire them in trade. Get them early in your dynasty startup. Yeah,
look, I've talked about the scarcity of those numbers and the difficulty in finding that outside of the top of a draft. And yeah, you're right. Like, that's why in another startup I did the other day, I took Darius Garland at 16 because, again, this is like an 8+ assist player. Mitchell might leave in a year or two. This is, we're talking about 20 and 8 guy who might be a 24 and 9 sort of a player, and he just went there as well. So after Trae, it went Don Mitchell, Giannis, Darius Garland. This is all going relatively according to plan. I do like that Sean there took Booker at number 10. I think he's going to have a really big season. He is, as much as we think he's a younger player, he's like 27 or 28, so he's pushing towards that prime area. Where do you consider prime in a dynasty league? Where do you see a player sort of topping out and starting to decline, or what's your cutoff area?
Yeah, so I usually you see primes start around the same time for players, around the time that they're around 24 years old or so. And the length of that prime kind of depends on the quality of the player. I mean, obviously, you see all-time greats like LeBron James have a prime that extended well into their 30s, almost into his mid-30s. But most players, I think, you're now getting around 30, 31 years old, where they're probably going to start to have a drop-off.
That's how I see it as well. I see that the prime can extend, you're right. Like, the better you are, your prime can extend to 34, Steph, Dame, LeBron. We're seeing that now. But in terms of where you hit the absolute peak and start to decline, it's usually actually around 29, which people don't see that as, that is an old age. It's not old, but if you go from being unbelievably excellent, the number 1 ranked player at 29, then at 30, maybe you're third, which is still really good, but it's the top of the hill. It's where the decline starts. So while someone who is good like Booker might still be very, very good at age 32, 33, the downward slope begins usually around 29 or 28, 29 for most players is what I found. Now, this is coming up to your pick. If you want to talk through any thoughts, I'll go through the selections that happen here. Garland, Towns, Mobley, Sabonis, Scoot goes there to Mitch at pick 9 in round 2. Banchero, that is interesting. Now, I know I am pretty big on Banchero. People hate what he did last season in terms of efficiency, but I didn't expect him to go there. Mikal Bridges goes at pick 23. Now it's you at 24. What are you thinking?
Yeah, so I've got a decision to make here because obviously with third round reversal, I'm not getting the back-to-back pick. So this is my last chance for a lot of guys that are available to me. I already have Jokić and have that elite production and not a lot of risk with him. I think what I'm going to do is take a little bit more risk here And I'm going to select Anthony Davis, who I think can give me elite production, as we saw last year, to pair with Jokić. Give me a chance to win immediately in this league. And I think I can get a little bit younger and maybe even some safety on the back end to be able to protect me against the risk there. But I love the combination, if healthy, of having Jokić and Davis on the same team.
That is a good combination. And it's coming up to my next pick. And I'm in a situation where I do have Chet, I've got good blocks, and a name that's sticking out to me is Walker Kessler with his block ability. I don't think he's got super, super high upside, and it's probably a little bit early for him, so I don't think I'm going to take him. But, well, Scotty Barnes goes, but he's an interesting option for me there. I think there's some level of overrating him, but I don't think we're going to do that. What I might do, though, at the age of 26 is take Larry Markkinen. Yeah, I'll take Larry Markkinen there. Again, we've probably got 4 years or so of this similar level production. I think that he, again, on this Jazz team, is going to lock in as that number one guy for at least 3 to 4 years. And yeah, I'm happy with that, what he's able to do. I don't see him getting necessarily significantly better than last season, maybe even a little bit worse. But just getting, again, a level of scoring onto my team, I think he is really useful. What's your view on Kessler? Because I know he's going to go wildly high in some drafts, but I do think that some of those players who are real sort of 2 to 3 category guys who are big negatives in every other category, they can get overvalued because there's a common misconception. Well, I think it's a misconception, Matt. The people go, well, he can win you blocks every week. And that's just not true, because to win blocks every week, you probably need 35 blocks a week in a standard sort of format. And he's not blocking 35 shots a week. So people have that idea that he wins you blocks every week when it's just, it's not really true. So I think he gets overvalued somewhat. How do you see it?
Yeah, I lean against in my dynasty rankings centers with the traditional big man stat set where you're really only getting field goal percentage, rebounds, and blocks from them, and some deficiencies in free throw percentage and assists and steals often. I just don't think that's valuable early on. I can get that later, and that's usually proven to be a smart strategy in dynasty startups.
And you see a lot of players with high block rates. It decreases as they get older. Yeah, outside of Brook Lopez last season, it jumped back up, but it does tend to decrease. And I'm actually working on something that's a little bit different in terms of ranking numbers because of the way that stats are distributed. And my first pass through it yesterday actually knocked a lot of those high block guys, Miles Turner, Walker Kessler, Clint Capella, those guys who are really in those traditional big man stats, it knocked them significantly down the ranks. So I think someone like Kessler's a little bit overrated. It's getting ready for your pick. I'll just recap what happened. Start of round 3 was Barnes, then I took Markkinen, then Zion went, Walker Kessler, Josh Giddey, who's still in the 20 amazingly, Şengün, Bam Adebayo, Miles Turner, De'Aaron Fox, Ja Morant, DeJounte Murray. Now, I know Jason has been tweeting about this a lot with this. He's like a big Ja Morant hater in terms of fantasy, but he's like, Ja's getting significantly underrated in dynasty circles because people go, well, he suspended 25 games, which in the scheme of things means absolutely nothing from a dynasty perspective. And he was another one of those guys that when I did tweak my ranking system, his value actually looks a lot better than it does when you look at traditional ranking systems. So while people look at that and think that's way too high because they've got the redraft mentality or the suspension and future problems and injuries, I actually don't mind it. Now, I want to you to talk through this. DeJounte Murray goes at the end of round 3, and then it's you here picking end of round 3, start of round 4. You took Jalen Williams, who was a top 30 player end of last season post-trade deadline on the back of some very high shooting and very high steal numbers. What do you see as his road to, I guess, consistently being around this area? There are some people who are like, well, he's just going to continue it. Some people are like, well, I think the usage might drop with Chet playing, which I don't really think is a problem. Where do you see Williams going from here?
Yeah, so with Williams, I think the misconception is that he was somehow driven by usage last year in his fantasy value. He just wasn't. This wasn't a guy, who was delivering on high usage. Chet is not going to be a high usage player on this Thunder team. I don't see any issue on that front. The question is whether the steal production, which, in 2023, once the calendar turned over, Jalen Williams led the entire NBA in total number of steals. Now, maybe that isn't consistent, but this is an extremely high field player playing in a defensive system that suits his length and his IQ on the court defensively. I think he will be a high steal player. Might not be at quite that rate, but it's going to be delivered for him. And we saw improvement in his scoring ability as the year went on, extremely efficient. And we know he has playmaking ability because he was a big point guard at Santa Clara. I think there's untapped potential beyond this, and I'm totally happy to take him at number 36 here.
Honestly, I was debating him when I took Markkanen at the start of round 3, but I thought, well, that's maybe a little bit too high, but you're right. Usage doesn't matter. It's same as like people go, well, oh yeah, Josh, I get why you're going to fade Shea. It's because Chet's coming. It's got nothing to do with that. Chet doesn't impact him whatsoever in that sort of situation. My issue with Shea is, what if the shooting just drops off because it took such a gigantic leap forward? What if the blocks, who took such a big leap forward, drop off a little bit? That's my issue with that. But you're right. Like, I've got no problem with Jay. He's such a versatile player. There's always going to be minutes. There's always going to be a role. I worry the steals are volatile year on year, as I've discussed many times on this show. But the shooting numbers were encouraging. We'll see where it goes. I am encouraged. And again, I did debate it at the start of round 3. I don't think it obviously didn't do it. Well, I'm going to think about next pick. Do you want to recap what happened after you took Jalen Williams?
Yeah, so I took Damian Lillard with the next pick. I think there's going to be elite production wherever Dame ends up in this upcoming season, and I think his shooting is going to lead to a prolonged prime for him. I'm glad to take that as a guy who could still be a first-round standard value for a couple more, maybe 3 more years to come.
So after Lillard went Bane, who I was hoping, actually was considering him where I took Markkanen as well. Bane, Jamal Murray, Jaylen Brown, Porzingis, Tyrese Maxey, Steph Curry goes in round 4, Amen Thompson, Kyrie, Nick Claxton, and then I want your opinion on me taking Franz Wagner at the end of round 4 there, which is pick number 47. Franz was almost undoubtedly the Magic's best player last season. He is 21, and yes, Brandon Ingram is better than him at the moment, but in 2 years' time, I'm pretty sure we're not going to be singing that tune. I really like what Franz can do. He's already very, very good, and the best player on his team at age 21, and I'm excited to see what happens. Is that a controversial pick? How do you view that?
No, I think this is value compared to where he goes in a lot of startups. Franz has a lot of potential. We saw him through the early portion of the season before Markelle Fultz came back into the fold, where he was averaging upwards of 20-plus points per game. I think that's only going to grow. He gets to the rim at will. I think the three-point shooting will develop from here, and I could see him becoming a 25-plus point per game scorer across his prime pretty easily.
It went Franz Wagner, then it was Brandon Ingram at 48, Kevin Durant at 49, and then I took Jabari Smith at number 50. And the 45-second timer is tough, especially when I haven't even finished doing my projections for this season. I just, again, age. He's 20. He started to improve at the end of last season. There is a extraordinarily good fantasy skill set. It might not pan out, but I could say that for Chet. I could say that for even Wagner on my team. Where's Jabari usually going in drafts?
He's moving up, and he was kind of falling down even back toward, like the top 75 range in startups after kind of a clunky rookie season. But the Summer League has reinvigorated a lot of people's interest in Jabari, and I think a lot of the prospect hype that we saw around him pre-draft last year is coming back with good reason. I mean, he looked confident. He looked like the player that we saw at Auburn, and I think there's reason to be excited about him long-term in Houston.
So after I took Jabari, it went Anunoby, Jalen Brunson, which I feel like is a big slide there for Brunson. I probably should have grabbed him instead of Jabari, but whatever. Asar Thompson and then Fred VanVleet. So you see, this is with the extra dimension that brings in a dynasty. Like Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, and Jalen Brunson going in this area, and even James Harden. It's great. They're all going to be better than probably 30 guys that were picked ahead of them. But if we're talking about what's going to happen in 2026 or 2027, then that flips the script quite a bit, and that's where we get some really interesting things developing in a startup like this. And it's really hard to criticize nearly any pick because so much can change and so much can happen, and drop-offs and rises can be really sharp or can be slow. We just don't know how it's going to go. After Harden is Jalen Duren, Mark Williams. Hey, that's an interesting discussion. Duren or Williams, both rookie centers from last season. How do you rate the two of those guys? Actually, you make your pick and then we can come back to that. Trey Murphy goes next. Really like Trey Murphy there as well.
All right, right here, coming in at number 60, got a couple picks in a row. I'm going to keep beating the drum of trying to get points, getting assists. I think this guy's going to have a big season if he can possibly share the ball with Kyle Kuzma. I'm going to take Jordan Poole with my selection here. Set for a huge season in Washington, and I think this is something that I can capitalize on, whether I want to keep him or whether I want to move him after a big season. But that really matters in a startup of not only understanding what the long-term trajectory is for these players, but how they're going to do in the upcoming season and how that's going to impact their value, because you're always looking for ways to be able to gather more value for your team and capitalize on, kind of the recency bias that people are going to have when a player really pops. And I think that's going to be Poole this year. So I like the value in getting him there.
I like it too.
This is a little more difficult for me. A lot of options to be able to take, but I'm going to come back with another guard who's going to get me a lot of points in production. I really liked what we saw from Zach LaVine last year. I was down at him with the knee issues. I think he maintained it pretty well through this past season. I'm willing to take on that risk because I want to get points early. I don't want to start going into all these traditional big men like DeAndre Ayton, who just went, like a Jared Allen, who I don't think are going to be able to help me in the categories that I want to be getting in these early rounds.
I like that. The Poole thing is really interesting because there's going to be plenty of people who watch this who are going to be, I don't know the right term, but the idea is like a rankings slave. Someone who's like, well, look at the numbers. He was actually 140th last season, and you can't roster him because his field goal percentage is going to kill you. There are people who say that, right? And that's well and good, but literally the year before that, he was 70th or something like that, as literally the same player. And yes, he's going to take a lot of shots, but I think what you talk about in terms of capitalizing on opinions, whether someone goes really high or people are just off them, much like the Banchero stuff, where, man, he's unrosterable with his percentages. Like, people are going to say that with Jordan. I've heard literally people tell me they wouldn't draft Jordan Poole. He's unrosterable in a redraft league this season because of his field goal percentage, which is an insane way to view it, I think. So that is, again, capitalizing on that. Back to that original question, Duren and Mark Williams, where do you sit with those? I do view Duren probably significantly better than Williams. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think that this season I could see a scenario where Mark Williams is ahead of Jalen Duren, only because I think that their minutes are probably going to be similar, but Williams is older, a little bit more developed, already blocking shots at a level that Duren isn't. I think Duren, and we saw this under Dwayne Casey, Isaiah Stewart had the same thing where he stopped chasing blocks, and Duren away stopped chasing blocks, even though that's something he did at Memphis. I think it will eventually come where he learns how to not be chasing blocks, but still getting them by being sound defensively, and I like Duren more long-term for that reason.
I agree with that. After Ayton, it was Jalen Green, Devin Vassell, Drew Holiday, Onyeka Okongwu, Keegan Murray, Jaden Ivey, Jimmy Butler, Jarrett Allen. So now it's my pick. I have Austin Reeves in my queue here, and I don't know if I need to take him right now or I can wait a little bit on that. I've got some other names like Paul George at this point. Like, it doesn't really fit my team, but it's pick 71. I might take Paul George, and then I might come back with Reeves in the next one. Like, that's some pretty good value, I think, for Paul George to get him at that spot. For as much as you might hate Paul George, you might have three more years as a top 25 player, which I think is all right value there.
Yeah, I thought about taking George instead of LaVine. I think that there's a good argument for, taking him at this range. You're losing a lot of the risk once you're starting to get, toward the top 75 range of taking a player who could give you top 25 production. It's okay that they might get injured.
Brandon Miller goes at 72. Is that about the range? That's about the range that I have him at the moment. Is that about where you've got him?
Yeah, I think that's going to be about where he falls. Everyone's really down on him after Summer League, which is understandable. Kind of a thinner perimeter player is always going to struggle often in Summer League until they kind of figure out how to make their body work in the NBA, figure out how they can still win despite not being strong enough. And we've seen this over and over again with perimeter players like him. I still like him as a prospect, but he's definitely going to fall a little bit compared to where you usually see a number 2 pick fall in a dynasty startup.
I'm not down on him based on Summer League because that's exactly how I viewed him. Like, the problems that he had was why I had him at number 6, I think, in my pre-draft big board. Like, so he sort of did what I expected him to do. And the stickiness of draft position is a real thing. But he's a number 2 pick. Yeah, but like, he shouldn't be. And it's like the same way that James Wiseman. So I've had people telling me, man, he's going to start over Jalen Duren. He's a number 2 pick. He just never played. Yeah, but he shouldn't have been the number 2 pick. And if he was picked at number 12, nobody would give a shit about what he was doing or his potential or anything like that. And if Miller went at 6, no one would be talking about him. As well, this number 2 guy, what a terrible disaster. If they picked him where they picked Calabali, then no one would care. And I think that's a real thing that is, again, hard to get out of your head from a dynasty perspective. Well, if the NBA picked him at 2, that must mean he's the second best player. Yeah, well, they screw it up literally all the time, much like we do. So don't put that value based on that pick. Don't let it stick for too long, I think is more what I'm trying to say.
Yep. I think Miller could end up having a Chris Middleton kind of career. I think they're comparable players, and that could be what we're looking at. That doesn't have the upside that people really want there, so I can understand him falling here.
But you get him at 72, and he has a Chris Middleton career of the top 40, top 45 player for 8 years. It's awesome. Like, it's really good. And Chris Middleton's, like, he's definitely not Paul George in my mind at this point. But he might be Chris Middleton in 3 years, which is really, really strong. And that's exactly why I had him in this area. What do you think of Shaedon Sharpe, who couldn't pass the ball at all last season until the end of the year where it started to jump up, had some struggles with efficiency in Summer League. I do like his upside still, but that roster remains very confusing. And I think him and Scoot together can work, but there's still the Lillard question. There's still the Lillard return question. There's still the Anthony Simons situation. So there's still a lot of weird stuff going on with that roster. That shouldn't impact our dynasty thinking too much, but it does have somewhat of an impact.
Now, I think organizationally, Portland is all in on Scoot and Sharp long term
Agree.
as their backcourt. It makes more sense. Sharp has enough size to be able to fit well next to Scoot, and Scoot obviously has more length than your usual 6'2" guard. I think that Sharp, the athleticism and the tools combined with the shooting that he's already shown is such an elite combination that it's easy to see star trajectory for him, because it's so rare to have that kind of dunk contest athleticism combined with being able to shoot the way that he did as a teenage rookie.
I agree that they are in on him. I know that they are in on him like that, and that is their backcourt of the future. I worry that there might be a little bit of emptiness from Sharp. Like, what do you think Sharp can top out as a player comp? The thing that's in my head is probably a Zach LaVine, which is still really good, right? But that's not a top 20 player. It's like a top 30 max fantasy player. That's the sort of comp I have for him, I think.
Yeah, I can see that. The one argument is that we didn't think Anthony Edwards had any stock element to his game, but the athleticism was so good that once his head got there, he all of a sudden was putting up huge steal numbers. So Sharp has all of the tools for that. I think it's just waiting to see if that clicks for him and his feel allows him to be able to get to that point.
It's your pick now. So after, let's go recap. After Reeves, it went Jeremy Grant, Kawhi Leonard, Tyler Hero, DeMar DeRozan, Jeremy Sohan, Bradley Beal, Julius Randle. Jason, of course, took Anthony Black. Him and I are diametrically opposed in our evaluation of Anthony Black, and I think Black's probably not going to be a top 250 player at least this season. You make your picks, and then we'll discuss your picks, and then get back onto the Anthony Black discussion, because Wendell Carter went. I was actually considering Markelle Fultz with one of my upcoming picks, but because of the drafting of Black, I'm still a little bit scared, even though I'd say there's a greater than 50% chance that Fultz has a better career than Anthony Black. We'll see how that goes. Johnny Collins, banking on the bounce back for John there at 85. I think I would have waited another round or two, because they do also have Taylor Hendricks, who is probably going to be better than him really, really soon. I'm interested to hear your thought process on John there.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a reclamation project for his value. Utah is going to be attempting to be able to juice him up a little bit because I don't know if he's going to be a part of their long-term plan, but obviously someone that they could look to build around in the next couple of seasons before Hendricks was able to take on that role. And what I really like here is that we know that Collins at his best, and we had him at his low point last year, at his best, he's super fantasy friendly. And I think they're going to put him in a position to succeed, because this is a smart organization that plays super fast, plays heavily in transition, and is going to get Collins into some areas that he's better at scoring in than what Atlanta was doing with offensively.
Couple of really interesting picks after you took Pirtle. Tari Eason and then Bilal Coulibaly, which is wildly high for me for Bilal. For Eason, I really like him, but again, the path to minutes there is pretty tough to find behind Şengün, Smith, Dylan Brooks, who we shouldn't care about long term, but there's also Amen Thompson who can play there. I love Tari, but that's really just a bank on, well, the skill is eventually going to win out and he's going to be better than these other guys. And I'm not quite sure that I would have gone that high on either Tari or Bilal at that spot.
Yeah, I can see the argument for Tari just because the steal rate is probably going to be near the top of the league. And even if we're talking about a backup role, he could have significant value. I could also see Ime Udoka just absolutely loving him if he locks in defensively. I mean, this is what the Rockets are going to need on this team to be able to make having Şengün and Jalen Green playing heavy minutes in their lineup. They need someone like Tari Eason who can absolutely wreck things on the defensive end of the floor.
I really like Tari as well. He's also he's a little bit older compared to second-year players. I would love for him to be getting these minutes, and it's insane to me that Dylan Brooks is going to take minutes away from him. Look, I can see the Rockets' rotation's a complete mess at the moment. I can see someone like Şengün losing out. I can see Jabari losing out. I can see Tari losing out. I can see so many guys losing minutes here. So it's going to be really interesting. I just think it probably is a little bit high for me, but I don't hate it. I think it's going to be really good. Taylor Hendricks goes, wow, I like Taylor Hendricks. I guess are you finding that people are out on Hendricks a little bit because he didn't play in Summer League, which impacts people's thought process?
Yeah, I think that the hype on him was a lot higher until we just didn't see him through Summer League. And I think, obviously all the attention in Utah went to Keontae George during Summer League, and that was part of the reason that people have cooled. But in rookie drafts, he's still going, 7, 8 in most of them, even as high as 6. So there's still a lot of value in Hendricks at this point in the Dynasty community.
I just took Miles Bridges. I don't feel great about it, but I also think that at pick 95, I don't see how he doesn't return value there.
Yeah, I think the only question that I have is how is Charlotte going to treat a guy who took the qualifying offer and they don't have really anything that they're going to gain from playing in big minutes unless it's helping them win, which we'll see if this is a team that's competitive. I could totally see them saying, you know what, we got to play this guy because he's helping us win on the floor and we want to make the play in. If they're still trying to go by the Michael Jordan rules of we need to get into the 9 seed as best we can to play in the play-in, then maybe we're going to get a lot of Miles Bridges. But I could also see them, at some point saying we're not going to invest in this guy as much as we did previously because we know he's going to be heading out the door after the season.
I can see that. The thing that I would say that I'd feel more comfortable in leaning in that direction if they do bring back PJ Washington, and I don't think they are, and because Gordon Hayward's not a part of the future, I think they want to be Bridges and Miller. They would like that. Now, I don't think Bridges might not be back on this team. He might be completely done. I don't know. But I also think that, yes, it's everything was shit about what happened with his situation, but I still think he can contribute at a decent level basketball-wise, whether it's on this team or not. And again, we're not drafting solely for this season, Matt. So I think, I wouldn't take him at 50 or 60, but getting him in the 90s, I'm pretty happy with. I also went back after Bridges. It went to, I'll recap what happened. After Calabali, it was Michael Porter, Jaden McDaniels, LeBron goes in round 8, Gobert, Taylor Hendricks, Vooch, Cam Johnson. I took Bridges. Then it was Jarris Walker, Anthony Simons. I went back around with Dan Gafford. Then it was Cam Whitmore, Robert Williams, Derek Lively. Wow. Benedict Mathurin, Cason Wallace. Wow, that's early as well. Kyle Kuzma, Dyson Daniels, Markelle Fultz, Mitchell Robinson, and now it is you.
Woo. I came by quickly here.
That was fast.
There's a lot of kind of, already ready-made production that's still available on the board. And Andrew Wiggins, CJ McCollum. But I'm going to start out with a guy that I love, and I love the opportunity that he's going to get this year, kind of continuing in the trend of what I've been doing of trying to get guys that I think are going to have strong seasons this year and trying to build off of that value. I'm going to take Derek White, who I think already beat this number last year in fantasy production in many ways, and now has more opportunity and finally kind of that full runway to show off everything that Derek White does so well in fantasy, where he's giving you solid contributions across the board, now with more playmaking opportunity. So I'm really excited about Derek this year, and I think this could be a pick that I end up getting a lot of value out of. Next, I'm going to take a guy who, obviously had a strange season this past year, but I think he's proven himself to, while not being a fantasy superstar as many hoped, and has been a solid fantasy producer in his role in Golden State. And I like getting a little bit more scoring here, and a little bit of extra rebounding, some defensive stats as well. Wiggins is going to help me to be able to build out my forward rotation, because we need so many forwards with the lineup that we have assembled in this particular format.
I referenced earlier my adjustments to rankings that I'm trying, and Wiggins actually came out a lot higher than he does in traditional 9-cat type rankings. So that is an interesting one. He's not going to miss as many games as he did last season also. So I do like that. What do you think of the Jalen Suggs pick, who seems to be forgotten really as a player? I saw a projected starting lineup that had Gary Harris in there. Obviously, they drafted Anthony Black and Cole Anthony, and Markelle Fultz are still there. Suggs has already shown to me to be an above average to very good defender, and it's just all about the offense. I don't think they've given up on him as much as people think that they have.
I don't think they've given up on him, but the Anthony Black selection does feel like a direct overlap in many ways, because
Yeah.
Black's strongest suit is going to be as a defensive player. It doesn't mean that Suggs can't still succeed, but the runway for him to get big minutes does seem crowded at the moment. I think the Magic are going to have a lot of turnover in the next year because they're just too overcrowded with prospects at this point. There's going to have to be some consolidation and some change, and also you might see them transition into trying to be more competitive by next year. I still like Suggs as a prospect. I think he's going to be a good NBA player. I don't think we're heading in the Killian Hayes direction with him. I think we could still head into that Marcus Smart direction with him long term.
Yeah, I think that's all completely fair. Well, what am I going to do with this pick? Oh, I was going to quickly, it was on my queue. Noah just took him there after it went Suggs, PJ Washington, Zach Collins, Brook Lopez, Chris Middleton, Clint Capella, so a bunch of older guys there. Johnny Kuminga, Emmanuel Quickly, Bruce Brown. Oh, that's maybe a little early for Bruce, but that's okay. Now, I'm debating. There are a couple of interesting older guys available here, like CJ McCollum, but I feel like his drop-off is going to come pretty quickly. Quickly was a guy that I was considering there. What do I do here? Maybe, I don't really know how to... I think... Maybe I just get CJ at this point just to get some points and assists in as an older guy who I'm not really spending a high pick on at number 120 because he's going to outstrip that for at least a year, maybe two. And they don't have any strong shooting players who are necessarily coming behind him. Yes, Dyson Daniels is a point guard, but it doesn't really replace CJ's shooting. So yeah. I don't love it, but Keontae George, interesting.
Yeah, I think it's good value for CJ at this point. The one thing that I'll flag here, and this is just kind of a general strategy point, a lot of these veteran players are going to be more valuable on your roster than they're going to be in the trade market. You end up losing a lot. It's hard to try to get full value for the production that you're getting in the short term with older players in dynasty leagues. So if you're going to be taking these guys or acquiring them in trade, you kind of need to accept that you're going to have to hold them, or it'll be a little bit more difficult than you probably expect to be able to move them in trade because a lot of people in your league just won't be interested.
That's true. And when you're getting them at 120, I think largely that's just give me some value now, do something for my team, and give me numbers that are higher than that actual draft position. Now I need to make a choice in what I'm going to do here. I'm going to... I actually don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to just take a crack at Patrick Williams. I don't love him, but it's my bench. He's in year 4. It's make or break. And he could actually be worth a little bit more than that in a few years' time, I'm guessing. Yeah, I think that's fair value for Patrick Williams.
Yeah, there's still the upside that Williams, who is younger than some of the guys who are even in this draft class, is going to be able to build on what was a solid shooting season last year. It's lower volume, so you still want to see that improve. But he's obviously got the NBA body. He's got the ability to be able to defend. It's the kind of guy who's going to keep getting opportunity after opportunity because he is exactly what the NBA desperately needs, which is competent wings who can defend multiple positions and at least do something offensively. And he gives you enough of that, teams will keep waiting. The Bulls will keep waiting to see if they can get more from him.
Noah just took AJ Griffin, who was at the top of my queue. I should have gone on. AJ Griffin's so young, man. He's like he's 19 and a half. He turns 20 in December, I think. That's annoying. I wanted AJ Griffin there. I was trying to play the waiting game and hope that he slid under the radar a little bit and would come back around, but no such luck. What do you make of Isaiah Jackson? We know that he was a hype prospect last season. We got dicked around quite a bit, and now it's, I guess, sort of an afterthought. Like, where are you with him?
Yeah, I could easily see him not being part of the rotation again, even though he got dabbling in and being the backup center at points, alternating with Jalen Smith toward the end of the season. But I could see Rick Carlisle saying, well, I'm going to play some combination of Jarris Walker, backup 5, getting Obi Toppin, some of those minutes as well, and just trying to push through without having to play either Jackson or Jalen Smith in that rotation because we think, and I think we're right, that the Pacers are going to try to be competitive this year. And they were when they had both Tyrese Halliburton and Miles Turner on the floor together. And I think they have a much better roster this year than they did last year.
I agree with that. They are going to be better than they were. And there is a situation where he just doesn't play. Or you're right, they play Toppin or Walker or Smith as the backup. I still like Jackson quite a bit, but his value has fallen off from where it was last season. After Isaiah Jackson goes Tyus Jones, then Kevin Porter, who was also in my queue, who is going to play a significantly smaller role this season. But all it takes is an injury to either Jalen Green or Fred VanVleet, and he's back playing 30 minutes again. And I thought he was pretty good last season for as much hate as I've given Kevin Porter. It's not hate, it's criticism. He was, Jalen Johnson just went. I think that he's maybe being over-criticized at the moment. Now, it's your pick. Jalen Johnson was in my queue. I did not think he'd be going in round 11, but here we are. I don't think he's going to start this season, Jalen Johnson, but I would do it. I think he's better than Saddiq Bey, or going to be better than Saddiq Bey really quickly. But what are you viewing here? Established players, younger prospects, now that we're into the bench?
Yeah, at some point in a dynasty startup, you kind of have to play cleanup and get some of the guys who are just falling because they're not exciting to take. This is a guy who had a little bit of a rougher season last year, but I think there's a lot of bounce back potential since they did not take Scoot Henderson, and that's Terry Rozier, who should start again, big minutes, should have I could see him easily bouncing back to what we saw in the 21-22 season, and I like getting that value at this point at pick 133 of a guy who could be a top 75 player like he has been in many previous seasons that we've seen.
I just went to hit. I'll go ahead.
No. Since I only have a little bit of time here, I'm going to do kind of a similar thing. Don't like this long term, but again, I think it could be a player who gives some immediate production, at least at 134. I'll take Buddy Hield. I don't know if he's going to have as significant a role as Indiana as he did in this past year, but I think Carlisle likes that spacing. They're going to want to be able to space the floor and play 5 out. So I could see Hield still holding more value because the shooting is so elite.
Yeah, I was just adding Terry Rozier to my queue when you took him, so he was going to be one of my targets back there, because you're right, like, again, we're on the bench here, give us a year or two of production. With the bench, it's like, let's take a real long-term flyer, or let's just get someone who can sub in for one of my younger starters to give me immediate production as well, because it's part of the idea in a dynasty mock draft or dynasty startup is that you take some of the younger guys early, you get those guys, but that if you take them 7th round, it doesn't mean they have to be your 7th best player or they have to start for you. So then you can start in round 11, round 12, round 13, getting guys who will start for you year 1, keep you competitive while you've got those other younger prospects cooking on the bench. So like when Jason took Calabria there, he's probably not going to start for him most nights. He'll get the guys, which he did there in round 11. He took D'Angelo Russell, then Gary Trent, and those guys will start above. So getting the younger guys in and then finding the scraps of the older players who fall down later on.
Yeah, I think that's a good strategy. And here, we're talking about a league with 10 starting slots, 15 bench slots. But with the 4 games played max that we have set for each starting slot, your bench is just not as important as it is in a league where you can just keep churning and get in as many games played as possible. You're going to have to go with quality over quantity. So I'm going to be transitioning pretty quick here to trying to find upside to build into the back end of my bench, because that's what I should be looking for in a league with a bench this deep.
What do you think is a correct ratio in terms of when you're looking at your bench? I probably want 4 contributors, like who can, if I add them in, they're going to be able to hold their own in that sort of an area. And then probably the rest of it, I'm more speculative sort of guys that if I need to use them, they might help. But if they don't get any minutes, it doesn't bother me at all. I'm probably looking at 4 to 5 bench contributors who are good now, the older players, and then load up on the rest of the guys.
Yeah, I think that's right. About half of what your starting lineup allows for is about how many real contributors that you need if you're going to be a contending team. Any more than that can tend to be overkill, and you should really be focusing those bench spots on having upside for the future to make sure that you're constantly reloading your lineup into future seasons to stay competitive.
Exactly. Now, I'm a little bit annoyed that Jaden Hardy went there, but Karan is really loading up on young guys. He's got Hardy, Lively, Hendricks, Ivy, both Thompsons, Giddy, Garland, Cunningham. That is a very young team who probably will struggle this season, but in 3 years' time will be much stronger. Now, in terms of guys that I've got on my bench, I've got like Quentin Grimes, I've got Cole Anthony, and Denny Avdia. Sort of trying to, I guess, balance between if I had to play them this season, would they be useful? Yeah. But do they also have more upside to get better? Sure. Could they also not get better? Also sure. So that's the sort of thing that I'm trying to... Oh, I like that. I actually like that Ben Simmons pick there. So I'm trying to sort of skate between those two. I might go with Grimey, although Quentin Grimes is somehow older than Denny Avdia, and he's the same age as Cole Anthony, which is interesting. Anthony's had some really interesting advanced stats last season as well. They were really quite strong, but his part the minutes is tough. Avdia's got a starting role potentially in Washington. I'm going to take Grimes. Grimes showed the flashes of being a top 40 upside player in the right scenario. Now, he's not in the right scenario, but in 2 years' time, that might change.
Yeah, I think Grimes, at the very least, this is kind of the guy who coaches are going to want to play more than maybe their offensive production allows for. What I want to see from him is, converting a little bit more of that defensive ability into defensive playmaking. We
Yep.
haven't really seen the strong steal rate. It seems like he should get more steals than he does. So I'm really interested to see as he develops as a player if that improves this season.
After I took Grimes, it went Aaron Gordon, that's sort of what we discussed, getting those older players who can contribute at a strong level. That's pick 145. That's really good. Avdia went. All right, now Draymond's available as an older guy. Tobias Harris. I think I just might take Tobias Harris here as no. I'm going to take Jordan Clarkson, who's got a real chance at solid value this season, and that just fills my need of guys who can plug in. If I look at my lineup, actually, my lineup's pretty. I don't really have many guys there who are not going to contribute this year, but just another guy who gives me value to slide in when injuries hit some of these players. And then, in terms of him versus Cole Anthony, Anthony's got more upside theoretically, but it might not ever get realized.
Yeah, I think we thought that Clarkson was probably going to have fall off after this past season, that maybe his role wouldn't be where it was, but he's been extended. He's almost certainly going to be starting because they like to have him in the starting lineup. And I think his role could be pretty similar to what we saw in this prior season, which means he's going to be a strong fantasy producer.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked at that at all. What do you do with guys like, say, RJ Barrett? Historically terrible in category leagues, still young though. Always someone's going, well, what if it happens? It's the third pick stickiness again. Do you ever see anything happening with him?
This many years deep, I don't expect, transformation of who RJ Barrett is as a player or as a fantasy player. I think that he is probably always going to be this guy where we see him be much better in points formats than categories formats. The stat set has been consistent all the way going back to when he was at Duke. And players don't change that much unless it's going to happen very early on for them. While still young, this is who he is as a basketball player. So we might see some incremental improvements, but I don't expect an entirely different guy to emerge at this point.
Nope, neither do I. I don't see why it would change. I had an argument with someone, because I was criticizing his workout video, and someone said, man, you just needed to watch the playoffs and see how good he was. And I looked at his numbers. He was a team worst -17 on off and a team worst -5 net rating, and still was below average true shooting like he's been in every single season. Some very interesting picks there. Kobe Buffkin goes after Tobias Harris at pick 4, round 13, followed by Malachi Branham, that's wildly high for me. Zubats, and then Leonard Miller. People really reaching into the young people group. Now, when you see a run on these guys who have absolutely zero shot of returning that value this season and maybe next season, Buffkin, Branham, and Miller, does that make you go, oh, maybe I'll start needing to grab prospects a little bit earlier now to stash on my bench versus cleaning up the veterans that are remaining?
I will say this. I don't think that, this is the stage where I would necessarily be going for the complete reaches. I think that there's still a lot of present season value on the board, which works for most rosters to continue to add. And I'm of a belief that, if you're looking at this from the perspective of just trying to find upside, there's plenty of guys that are going to be available in the upcoming rounds that are going to jump up. They're going to have similar ceilings as these guys that we're seeing going here, the Leonard Millers, the Malachi Branhams. So I'm not going to scramble and completely change my game plan at this point just because there's a small run on them in the 13th round.
Brandon Pajemski went. I like Pajemski, but that's definitely stashability. And so that's Jason, I guess, falling into, well, a lot of my prospects are going, let me grab some of them. Andrew Nembhard was someone who was in my queue. He just went at 13-11. And now it's you at the last pick of round 13.
Yeah, so I really like some of the things that we saw from Cole Anthony last year. I don't think it's going to be on the Orlando Magic, but this is a guy who I think is kind of a second draft candidate, second team candidate, could end up having a really productive NBA career because he's improved as a shooter and he has, kind of larger than his size rebounding ability. Overall, just feels to me like a guy who could emerge somewhere at some point as a fantasy producer and still extremely young. Here, there's still a ton of win now possibilities on the board. I'm going to go with the guy who I think proved that his prime is going to be longer than people thought, that he's not done yet, and that there's still some good fantasy years, maybe a couple more really strong fantasy years ahead. And I'm going to take Draymond Green for the position flexibility and his ability to be able to pop in multiple categories. That is pretty rare to be able to get at almost pick 160 at this point. So I'm glad to take Draymond at this stage.
I'm not going to call you an asshole for taking Cole Anthony after I've been talking about him for the last 10 minutes, but it's maybe asshole adjacent, Matt. I do think he's got real pop ability, but you're right, it's not going to be on this team. But Josh Green goes after that, and Lonzo Ball. Okay. If Lonzo Ball ever plays, that is amazing value. But what would you put the chance of Lonzo Ball ever playing at? 5%? Yeah.
We're at a stage now where there are some success stories. There's, I think, a football player over in the UK who managed to be able to come back from having this kind of meniscus replacement surgery. But basketball is an even more high impact sport, and it's difficult to imagine that Lonzo could either come back or come back to being remotely close to the player that he was before. I really hope it happens.
I'm going to throw a name out there, and I want you to have a look at your Dynasty ADP data, given again your name. Where's Cam Thomas going?
Cam Thomas is going outside of the top 150 in most drafts. I don't think that includes any adjustment to what may be happening this year in Brooklyn, where they might be kind of clearing the decks to force him to get an opportunity and force Jacques Vaughn to be able to play him consistently. And if that happens, that could end up being a great value.
Because as much as people might think that I'm a Cam Thomas hater, I'm more of a Lonnie Walker hater, and I think Cam Thomas is much better prospect than Lonnie Walker, and they're the two guys who are going to be battling for that backup guard role. And you're right, like getting rid of Seth Curry, getting rid of Joe Harris, at some point they're going to have to see if Cam Thomas can do anything apart from being a 30% hoggy shooter. And this is the opportunity. I'll see where it ends up going. I'm not 100% convinced that he's going to be good, but I also think that, outside the top 150 is a surprise to me, given what he did last season. Like the differences in opinion people have. Like I put out a projected Brooklyn Nets starting lineup, and someone's like, "Why isn't Cam Thomas starting?" I go, "Look, he's got no chance of starting really in this lineup at the moment." But they're also, if you're thinking that he's completely out of their plans, I'm not really sure that that's accurate. Chris Paul goes there. So let's recap what happened there. Lonzo Ball, Klay Thompson, Christian Brown, Trace Jackson Davis for the 57th pick in the draft. That is a wildly high selection. Chris Paul, Peyton Watson. That's a great one. Peyton Watson. That's a very, very good pick there of Peyton Watson. What do you think of Peyton Watson for this season?
I think that at the very least, he's going to be locked into the rotation there. I could see him end up taking a lot of the backup center minutes because I think he can fit in there, and they don't really have a strong option that I believe in. I think the Zeke Naji experiment, he's not really a center. He doesn't want to be a center. He might be that size, but I don't think it's going to work. I think Watson's going to fill in to whatever role is needed for them, similar to Jeff Green last year, and he could be wildly productive with his block rate, even if it's only 18 minutes a game.
Yeah, I really like him. I would have liked to have him. I had Naz Reid at the top of my queue, and he just went there to Noah at 14-9. Then it's Malik Monk, and I'm going to pull the trigger. I know people will think, what am I doing? But I'm going to take Cam Thomas at that selection. I just think, again, we're in round 14 here. Let's see what happens. Let's see if it hits. Let's see if they trade guys away. Let's see if they give him an opportunity. And if they don't, I'm going to be okay with that. There are a bunch of other, like you said, win now guys available there. Kyle Anderson's still there. It's getting to a stage where RJ Barrett is actually an option for us. And he's a guy that is going to play minutes right now and is still young, even though he's shit. But that's an option for us, or for me. Nurkic goes next. Okay, so I'm looking at my team. I've got a bunch of guys who can contribute already. So I think it's almost time for me to take a flyer. Is Kobe White a flyer? Kobe White to me is Cole Anthony, like 95% Cole Anthony, a guy that showed a little bit of flash. It's probably not going to happen on the Bulls. A lot of people seem to be, you bastard, Osman Jeng, man, how did you take him there? He was ready for me in round 16. What do you think of Kobe White, who, again, I think it's not probably going to happen. Some people think he's going to start for the Bulls. I don't know why he would when he didn't last season, but I think there's a Cole Anthony style upside for him potentially coming.
Yeah, he's very high up on my board right now, someone that I would have considered with my next pick. And I agree that it's a similar arc as Cole Anthony is on right now, where there's a competency that he has as a guard that's at least going to make him a third guard for a long time in the NBA because he has enough size, because he has enough shooting ability and you can run some offense through him and have himself create a little bit. That's just going to be an innings eater, like a Karis LeVert that teams are going to keep giving minutes to because you need those innings to be eaten during the regular season.
You do. You do. And, just again, I think there's significant upside there on where he is. He's one of those guys that when I did like some Dynasty undervalued players that I talked about, because it was like 5 weeks ago, it was him. There was Peyton Watson on there. Just guys that are a little bit buried, a little bit under the radar that have an opportunity. And one of the other guys there is Jaden Springer, who's on my list, and we'll see where he ends up going. Kevon Looney goes there after I took White, then Jaime Jaquez, who I don't really believe in, and then Noah Clancy. Where are you at with Jaquez? Because a lot of people, man, it's heat culture. Look how good he looks. I did not translate him particularly strongly coming out of the draft. I don't know if he's going to be in Miami or in Portland, but a guy that played 4 years at UCLA and still couldn't shoot through any of those years is a little red flaggy to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to be able to take guys who are that age, who have played, being 4-year players in college basketball, and expect them to be able to translate into fantasy stars, fantasy relevant players. Definitely a guy that I believe in as a role player, who I think will be on NBA rosters in rotations for a long time, because he has enough size, because he plays a really tough style of basketball and fits into a role, whatever that role is. You saw him play multiple roles at UCLA and thrive in all of them. I think that will work, but it doesn't mean fantasy production necessarily.
No. I think he might be one of those guys that's just really good out there. He's tough and he does these little things, but that doesn't mean anything necessarily for producing fantasy value. Have you got, obviously it's only a mock, so we don't need to worry about stealing each other's picks. Have you got someone that you just really, actually we just saw apparel manufacturing legend Jonathan Isaac just go there at pick 10, round 15 after Moses Moody. Have you got a player that you're like, man, he's a really deep cut and I hope to get him?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about Jaden Springer before, a guy that I definitely like and want to take at some point. I don't think I'm going to do it here. At this point, I just want to take players that I think will pop in fantasy if given the opportunity. I don't want to. I'm 14 picks deep. I've got a ton of win now players. I have a win now team, but I want guys, if they get the opportunity, could be real difference makers, could help push me over the top. So first, I'm going to take a guy who we know when he plays significant minutes, he's going to be a big-time fantasy producer in a lot of categories. Jared Vanderbilt, an imperfect player, but so many of them are at this point still young. And I think he's going to continue to get opportunities in the league, because there's just so much that he does impactfully on the defensive end that teams are going to want to get him out there, especially in the regular season when his deficiencies just aren't going to matter as much. And coming back here, and this is a guy who, I don't know, is he going to play in China this year? It's unclear what's going on with him. But we know, no matter what his role is, Christian Wood is going to give you fantasy production. And we're at pick 182 right now, and we're getting a guy who, when he gets minutes, could give you, top 50 production for stretches. So why not? Let's see what happens. I don't think Christian Wood is probably a good fit on any NBA team, but some NBA team is probably going to do it. And if he even plays 24 minutes a night, if he even plays 20 minutes a night, I can probably beat that level right there, and maybe even flip him, because there's always a few guys in your league who absolutely love Christian Wood and believe that if he just got the right opportunity on the right team, he would be an all-star.
Yeah, that's. I don't think any of those people are in this league, but you are right. And the same is going to apply to Kelly Oubre, because he's not signed anywhere. But we're going to be, by the time we get round to my pick, like 193. Like I'm all right. Like having a crack at him there. Like after he literally just averaged one of the most fraudulent 20-point per game seasons, but he averaged 20 points per game last season. So I'm okay with grabbing him there. And there are players that I just don't like particularly, like him, like Saddiq Bey, but they're still sitting there. And Bey's going to be a starter this season. I've almost no doubt about that. And he's going to be available at pick 190. I don't think he's very good, but Corey Kispert might be a starter this season. Max Strus is probably going to be a starter this season. There is still value, and these guys aren't old. Yes, Westbrook, Conley, they're starters. Brogdon, Horford, not Barnes, Adams, you can see at the top of the queue. Okay, they're all older players, but like there's some other guys who are going to have value this season, or even Colin Sexton just went there. Like that's very, very late for Collins. Like for Colin Sexton to go behind Jalen Hood-Schifino, and I don't like Colin Sexton, but I would say that there's a 10% chance that Hood-Schifino's ever better than what Colin Sexton is.
Yeah, I did not like Jalen Hood-Schifino and how he projected coming out of Indiana, and nothing about Summer League changed that for me. And yeah, I would not be investing in him at that level. But yeah, players like Sexton, they're post-hype. I mean, we had a point where people were all in on Colin Sexton. And obviously, between the ACL injury and the slow recovery last year, the bloom has come off of that rose. But you could see him another year removed from an ACL recovery, looking a lot like he did at his peak in Cleveland, and having a really strong season for the Jazz, who desperately need self-creation from someone. I think that could be Keontae George. It's obviously going to come from Jordan Clarkson, but there should be a lot of opportunity for Sexton this year.
some wild picks here. I'd love to hear your take on James Wiseman, who is the Pistons' fourth best center. Jet Howard and then Zeke Naji. Like Zeke Naji, wow, that is okay. I don't think Sadiq Bey is a good player, but man, I can't not take him there. Like there is that some of those Zeke Naji is a wild pick to me. Jet Howard, not interested. Yeah, but back to Wiseman. Like, are they actually going to force him to play this season? And I don't think Marvin Bagley is good at all, but Wiseman's worse than Marvin Bagley, and it's Duran, it's Bagley, and it's Stewart. They're all better than they're all better than what James Wiseman is. I do not get it at all.
I would not be surprised, given the conflict that he had with DeAndre Ayton, if we see similar issues with Monty Williams and James Wiseman. And I would not be surprised at all if Wiseman ends up finding his way out of Detroit and they just move him for, a fake second-round pick or something to be able to save some face for the fact that they had to spend as many second-round picks as they did to acquire Wiseman in the first place. I don't see this experiment working, and I'm at least encouraged by the fact that it looks like they're going to focus on giving Jalen Duren big starting minutes this year. That's what James Edward III from The Athletic was projecting, and he's very tapped in and understands what they're thinking in the Detroit front office. I would expect that that's where Monty Williams would want to go too, and I think that's what's going to happen. I don't see anything happening for Wiseman in Detroit this year or beyond.
Paul Reed just went. I took Sadiq Bey, then it was Portis and Paul Reed. Again, another player that I don't particularly like, Ochai Agbaji, but there are a few Jazz people. I'm going to be doing a Jazz preview show next week with David Locke, and he seems to think that Agbaji is going to start. I don't think so, but he thinks they're going to start Clarkson Agbaji and not Sexton, which is, again, crazy to me, but they seem to love him. I don't. They do. I might just take a look at him. I don't know. I don't love it, but yeah. His stat set's not great, but Jazz people love what this guy did. I don't see it, but so at some point I'm just going to take a crack at it.
Right. So that's what I projected after free agency. I was looking at the Jazz. There were a lot of different options. I moved off of it because everyone told me, well, that's not going to happen. It's going to be Sexton or, it's going to be Talen Horton-Tucker.
It won't be him.
Exactly. And ultimately, I just kind of by default put Sexton in there, but I think the theory of it makes sense that Agbaji could be kind of like a Contavious Caldwell-Pope in that lineup, that he's, a guy who isn't going to do anything with the ball other than shoot it. And, you can theoretically get some defense out of him. I don't think he's there yet. And I'd be surprised if that works for them early on in the season, but they might try it because at least theoretically it's the kind of player that would fit well into that lineup.
Yeah, I still don't think they're going to do it, but I've heard from multiple people now that they are looking towards that. And I don't understand it. I don't understand. I thought them re-signing Clarkson and trading for Collins means they were trying to push to win more and get into the play-in and playoffs this season, and starting Agbaji doesn't get you there. So I don't know how to sort of balance those two things up. There's a player sitting at the top of the queue that we have to mention. Oh, Kelly Oubre, that's a good pick. What are you making of Russell Westbrook here?
Yeah, I think that the resurgence that we saw with the Clippers last year, probably a little bit of fool's gold. I'm not really buying into any long-term stability for him in the role that he's in. We're seeing him now valued at a very low level as far as his contract goes, and that's where the NBA sees him. I for the same reason, wouldn't value him highly. We're getting to a point where it's deep enough into the draft that if you want that, immediate Russell Westbrook stat set, you're probably going to get a lot of good games with it when you don't have Paul George or Kawhi Leonard in the lineup, especially if they don't get James Harden. But of course, if they do get James Harden, that could change. With my pick here, I'm going to take Kyle Anderson, a guy who anytime he plays minutes, gives you fantasy production. That's the theme of what I've been trying to do with these last few picks. And I could see Anderson having a similar level of production, just with a little bit less minutes, depending on how healthy the Minnesota Timberwolves are this year. But he's too good to be able to keep out of the lineup and too helpful for them not to play in a consistent role. And coming back, I'd like to get a little bit more upside. I'm scanning through. This is a funny pairing in a way that in that one of them is kind of blocking the other, but I think Anderson could be out of Minnesota in short order. And this is a guy who I love the fantasy stats. I'm going to take Josh Minot, who absolutely tore up the G League last year after barely playing at Memphis. It was similar to what we saw with Peyton Watson, where it was a guy who, as a freshman, super young, didn't get a chance in college, and then all of a sudden comes into the G League and looks phenomenal. So Minot is a guy who might be available in your standard dynasty league. If you have some managers a little bit less engaged in the NBA, they might not know who he is, but a guy who could absolutely pop once he finally gets an opportunity to be in the Minnesota rotation.
The problem is on that team is it's Gobert, it's it's Towns, it's Anderson, it's McDaniels, it's Reed, and then there's Leonard Miller and Josh Minot. And both Leonard Miller and Josh Minot, I believe, have top 50 at worst fantasy upside. I just don't know how the hell it happens, but that is an investment for the future. He put up great numbers in Summer League. He looked great in person as well. Minot, that's frustrating for me, for you to get him there, because he is, again, no one thinks about him. But he's got an unbelievable, and the Peyton Watson comparison is very apt. And also, I think he's got Jared Vanderbilt upside, but with actually more offense. And get him 26 minutes a night, find the right team. Like, it's David Roddy was someone I just added to my list as well. He just went off the board. I think he's unfortunately going to start for the Grizzlies this season. So him going, I don't like him as a player again, but him going behind LaRavia is a little bit interesting in terms of that decision making. After Horton, let's go back. After I took a barge, it was Jokić, Kispert, Horton Tucker, Gabe Vincent, which I really like. Levert, really strong pick. LaRavia, Bones Highland, pretty solid. Kelly Oubre, Sasha Vezenkov, Kyle Anderson, Josh Minot, Nick Richards, Caleb Martin, Charles Bassey, and David Roddy. And now that I've got you on, and we just saw Sasha Vezenkov go, can you please tell everyone, so it's not just coming from me, that when you're doing an NBA Dynasty rookie draft after your league is established, players like Sasha Vezenkov aren't included in that, are they?
Sasha Vezenkov is on dynasty rosters from this prior season in some leagues. If you're in a 30-team league, he's a guy that you might have stashed because he was drafted all the way back in 2017. He was drafted in the NBA draft. His draft rights have been owned for all this time, and he could have been selected and was selected in some rookie drafts back in 2017. If you allow a guy like that to be selected in your rookie draft, then you are saying that your rookie draft is open to every international basketball player who is not an NBA, every basketball player who's not under an NBA contract, who has not played in the NBA yet, because they could be a rookie in the upcoming season. That's not the way rookie drafts work in dynasty leagues. You need to be able to enclose it only to the class that was just drafted and eligible for the most recent NBA draft. Otherwise, it's wide open to allowing all kinds of players who should be free agents and could be acquired through free agency like anyone else on your waiver wire.
This is the idea of a dynasty league in general. It's being able to identify talent, stash talents, why we preach have at least 250 players rostered, maybe 300, so that you don't have a three-man bench where you've got to make decisions to cut guys. That's not really a dynasty league when you've got, I had to cut Sadiq Bey last season in my Dynasty League. Well, okay, your Dynasty League is actually pretty much too small and you need to change that, because guys like Vasily Micic and Vezenkov, these guys were literally drafted 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. I'm going to make my next pick here while I go on this rant. And I'm just going to take the guy that I do like for a bit of upside. I'm going to take Orlando Robinson, who I think should be the backup center in Miami really soon ahead of Thomas Bryant. But these guys, and if someone... because we do the rookie draft for this year's draft, for example, and we take, I'm trying to think of a name, Tristan Vukcevic, right, who was pick 36 or whatever in the draft, but he doesn't come over this year. So what you are saying is that if your league does that and Vukcevic gets drafted in that draft, that you just end up cutting him and then you don't hold on to him. Like, what's the point of taking a player in a rookie draft that you're not going to hold on to? Like, you don't have that stash ability. So therefore, in 2 years' time, when he comes over, he becomes part of that rookie draft. That's just not how those things should work, in my opinion. So someone like him or a James Nagy, they're not going to be in the NBA most likely this season. So, or even Tariq Babirovic for Memphis, not as high level of a prospect. But they're drafted this year, and that's the point of a rookie draft. You draft to stash them, and if you cut them, it's like cutting any player. They become free to anybody to pick up, and that's part of the idea. Like, I've known Sasha Vezenkov was coming over this season for about 5 months, and if you wanted to grab him back in March. That's the point of it. It shouldn't even be rookie drafts. It should be draft eligible player draft. But the terminology, I guess, confuses some people. They're fucking Jaden Springer. How did you take him there, Mitch? And Bryce Sensabaugh as well. Now, Don Barlow. Geez, a lot of guys I like just went off the board. That is frustrating. So after I took Orlando Robinson, Jalen Noel, currently unsigned, Derek Whitehead, Bryce Sensabaugh, Rui Hachimura, Don Barlow, Jordan Hawkins, who I just do not like as a fantasy player, Jaden Springer, KJ Martin, Rashawn Holmes, and it's back to Matt at pick 12, round 19.
So, I mean, at this point, there's just guys who shouldn't be available when we're talking about, 230 almost in this draft. And I get it. Everyone wants to chase the young guys. I've been doing a little bit of that myself. But I'm going to come back, try to, make sure that if we use this for ADP, that it's more representative of where guys might go in real life. This guy somehow, I think he's still only, just now like 30 years old.
I think he's only 29, isn't he?
I think he might only be 29 still. He's going to be 29 forever. Steven Adams, weird season last year, but he should be back fully healthy this season, hopefully. I think he'll be back into the role that we saw him in Memphis previously, and he has productive years ahead of him. So that's a guy that I'm willing to be able to take at the back end, to be able to have some reserve front court depth. And oh boy, there's still so many guys that I take here, but let's have fun with a pick. I don't know if this guy's going to play at all, but when he does, the fantasy production is there. And I know someone loves him in your league, so you can take him at this point and enjoy it. That's Bol Bol. I'm a person who doesn't think that Bol Bol will be in the rotation this year, but there'll be moments then he has to play. Maybe Kevin Durant gets hurt. Maybe they need some self-creation. They're going to put Bol Bol in, and he's going to do Bol Bol things. People are going to get excited about it, and I'll be ready to be able to flip him for something that I like a little bit more. So I'm looking for that. Somebody who can pop, somebody who can give me something during a point of the season where they're all of a sudden seeming fantasy relevant, just like we saw Bol Bol be early last year in Orlando. I think that could happen even in Phoenix. And if it's not in Phoenix, it's probably going to be somewhere else, because this guy's going to keep getting chances because he's a almost unique player in the NBA.
And his dad's a legend as well. I think that part of that goes through. But I had just added Bol into my queue, and I was trying to add the, which players does Josh hate the most, and see if he can draft them. So Cam Thomas and Bol, put them all onto my team, and Sadiq Bey, actually. Put them all onto my team and see where we go from there. So after Bol, it was TJ McConnell. Yeah, I'm not even sure he plays this year, and he's like 30 already. Killian Hayes, is he back in Europe after this season? Possible. Aya Dosunmu, I think he's more of a chance of sticking in the league than some of these other guys, but I don't really see the upside. But at pick 20, who cares? He's going to get, I would guess, rotation minutes. There's a guy that I'm waiting. Why is Norman Powell still available?
That's a guy I looked at too.
I get Al Horford. He's old. Conley's 33. He's probably not a starter after this season. Harrison Barnes is just the most mid player of all time. Bogdanovic is still really good as well. Gordon Hayward's there. These are guys that at pick 240, they're going to provide value ahead of that for 2 years, 3 years at least, I would guess. And Terrence Mann, I'm shocked that Terrence Mann is still there, to be honest. So after Dosunmu, Russell Westbrook, Josh Richardson goes at 234. But it is. You see, there's so many of these. I want to circle back to this now, because there was that run of rookies, Whitehead, Sensabaugh, Barlow, not a rookie, but just young player. And Jordan Hawkins is in the mix there. I don't see it with him at all. Where are you at with Hawkins?
I did not particularly like Hawkins' fantasy stat set coming out of UConn, obviously an older prospect. I don't see the role to immediate opportunity in New Orleans either. So that's just a whole lot of things that are not working for me. Red flags that I'm not going to want to invest in. Now, at this point, the shooting is so high level that you can see him having a long NBA career. I'm willing to be able to take the chance to see if I'm wrong, but there's just not enough there that makes me think there's upside.
Did Dyson Daniels get drafted? I'm trying to find.
He must have, because he would have been high on he would have been high on my list.
Nick Smith goes it because I don't recall seeing him go. He must have been drafted. It's my pick now. I'm just going to take Norman Powell here. I'm not going to overthink that. That's very, very late for him. And then I've got Dennis Schroeder still there. He's probably going to be a starter this year. Terrence Mann. I might just grab a couple of, because there's no huge upside prospects. I think that the guy I would have loved to have gotten was Springer, but of course he's gone, and my other targets are not there. Oh, actually, no. That's the guy I'm going to... Brandon Clark goes, he's not going to play this season, but that's good investment. I'm going to go real deep here with my pick coming up. I'm going to take Ryan Rollins for Washington. Not going to happen much, but not going to happen this season. I think that there is some value in him coming across in that Chris Paul trade, or one of the trades that they made. They made 2 or 3 trades together.
I loved Rollins coming into the draft last year. He obviously didn't have any opportunity between injury and just being in Golden State, but this is a guy you could see by the end of Washington's season, if they're pulling the ripcord and just looking to play for lottery balls, who could end up doing a lot of things in fantasy, being kind of one of those late season heroes. So I like that pick.
I also like that Sean took Peyton Pritchard there. He's going to be a rotation player this season. He is 25, but he was one of those dynasty underrated players I looked at as well, that I thought there was going to be an opportunity open up. There was, and now it's his chance to show what he can do. And that's tremendous value for him at that spot, I think. Dennis Schroeder ends up going at 246. Jamal Cain, two-way guy from the Heat after that. How do you value two-way players?
I think they're underrated. We've seen a lot of them move into full contracts lately, and a lot of guys end up on those two-way deals with the idea that they're going to move to a full contract after that first season on a two-way. So I don't think it's a mark against them, especially when a lot of guys are only getting a season or two guaranteed on full roster contracts in the second round anyway. Have an open mind about guys who are on two-way contracts, and be mindful and be aware of all the two-way contracts across every NBA team, because we're seeing people emerge from that every single season, and I think we'll continue to see more in this upcoming year.
Love this pick from Alex, who took Julian Champagny. Now, a reminder, Justin Champagny is the one who did play for Boston, but they waived him today. So he is gone. Julian Champagny is the guy that tore up Summer League and put up big-ish numbers towards the end of last season. I don't think he's going to have a gigantic role, but he's probably a rotation player for the Spurs this season. He is a very interesting pick. Talk about a guy that was a previous two-way guy. Now, was Julian? Yeah, Julian was the Sixers guy that came across the Spurs last season. Justin was the Toronto guy that went to Boston. Now doesn't have a job. After Champagny was Omax Prosper, Dalen Terry, Matisse Thybulle, Larry Nance. All right, so what are you going here? Old, young? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm going to continue with my trend, go one for now, one for later. Bogdan Bogdanović is on an extension. He's going to have a significant role in Atlanta as he usually does. He's productive when he plays. I think that at this point, he just should have been selected already. And I'm going to take a guy that I really liked the fantasy projection for. And, as we know, if it gets validated at Summer League, it means you were right. If it doesn't get validated, then you throw out Summer League entirely. Kobe Brown was a guy that really popped for me in his fantasy stat set coming out of Missouri. The shooting feels like it might be real. If it is, big bodied guy, a little bit of creation ability, really strong player. There's not a lot of any opportunity on this Los Angeles Clippers roster right now, but this is a guy who I could see eventually emerging as a real player. So I'll draft a fantasy stat set that I like for a guy who it might take 3 years before he actually becomes relevant.
He's already 24 or close enough to 24. And he did shoot 46% from three at Missouri last season, and then was able to rack up steals and blocks there and in Summer League. And basically what he did in Summer League was what he did at Missouri. So that's the thing where you go, you're right. If it happens in Summer League, we love it. But it's just literally the exact same thing that he did at Missouri. Now, of course, the Clippers Summer League team probably had the same strength as a Missouri team, and he's going to be joining a team with Morris and Covington and Batum and Kawhi and George and Mann and a million other guys. But it is a bet for the future. Oh, Kenny Lofton goes there. I don't know. I don't think Kenny Lofton works in the NBA, but we'll see. There are people who are massively high on him. I don't think he works.
No, but he's going to tear up the G League, the Memphis Hustle. He's probably going to be the MVP for them this year. So
I am getting ready. I've got a bunch of guys on my queue that people can see, and you can probably see it as well. This is part of the genesis for my Terrence Mann went. That's annoying. Genesis for my two-way discussion. GG Jackson is someone I'm going to take a crack at here at round 22. He hasn't even signed the two-way deal. I don't know what the hell is going on there, but he is going to sign a two-way deal with Memphis. And just the age that he is, he might have been a top 5 dynasty rookie pick next year. And it might not work out, but I actually don't care at this point. Terrence Mann, Marjon Beauchamp, Jackson Hayes, Javon Carter, he was on my queue. He was going to be my one old, one young guy coming around as well. Can Sean let GG fall to me? I think part of the issue, if you are on Fantrax, GG's listed as Gregory Jackson, so just be aware of that. Lou Dort, cool. All right, let's go with Big Greg Jackson II and take him there. GG's numbers in Summer League were similar to his numbers at South Carolina, just no assists, bad efficiency. I still think there's something there. Like a guy who can create his own shot at that size, at that age, it's going to take a while, but I'm happy to wait.
I think if GG Jackson went to like a Charlotte or some other organization that has no track record of developing talent, I would be out. But he went to Memphis, who might be the best organization at developing young talent that we have in the NBA right now. So I'm intrigued because this is a guy, obviously, with the pedigree of being one of the top prospects in his class before he reclassified, obviously miscast and being like a super on-ball creator on a very bad South Carolina team. But let's see what happens. And at this point, it's absolutely worth the flyer.
Yeah, I hope that it works out as I think it does. We'll find out. So it's coming around to my pick. Jalen Smith went after that. We've only got 3 picks left, and I think I'm going to go with an older guy here. Maybe is Jalen Williams even an older guy? Not really, but he was quite good. Oh, but look at these guys. Look, Gordon Hayward's still there. Mike Conley's still there. Like at pick 270, I don't really think I can. Conley's a starting point guard, but I'm going to take Gordon Hayward, actually, because I do have a dearth of forwards. All right. It might not last long, but we all love the upside, but how do you pass on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you need to find balance in these drafts. And unfortunately, I think the mock draft setting can end up skewing a little bit more toward taking the shiny object than taking what people might do if money were on the line. And that's maybe where we've ended up here, where some of these guys are just no fun to be able to select and not someone that everyone's going to say, ooh, that was a good pick when you take them, end up just falling and falling and falling when they should probably go multiple rounds ahead.
Yeah, like I'm trying to look at my team to see how many rookies are actually on it. Let's have a look. Do I even have any rookies? I don't. The only one I have is GG Jackson. I took one rookie. How many did you end up taking?
Well, I don't think I
You got Kobe Brown.
Yeah, Kobe Brown I just took. You're right. And that's it. I think that's the only rookie that I took.
I've got
They went high in this draft.
Yeah, I've got young players. Like I've got Ryan Rollins, I've got Orlando Robinson, I've got Agbaji. These are all second-year guys. But yeah, I just didn't take any rookies. Interesting. Apart from, taking GG there in round 22. So after I took Hayward, it went Dylan Brooks, Jordan Walsh, Blake Wesley, Drew Eubanks. Blake Wesley, I feel like he's a long way down the depth chart. I do like Blake Wesley a little bit as a passer, upside, point guardy type of player, but yeah, not super confident. There are guys who are going to play big minutes. Dylan Wright, Tim Hardaway. Cam Payne's going to have backup minutes. Kyle Lowry, he's not that good anymore. Mike Conley is still there, which is, again, so say Karan's team, like he's gone really young and is identifying a lot of prospects. But if he adds Mike Conley in round 23, Conley will be his 5th best player this season, maybe 6th best player.
I think Conley's going to have a nice season, and I get it. There might only be one other season after this of Mike Conley. That could be the end of the line for him. But we're talking about a bunch of guys who will probably never have as good of a fantasy season as Mike Conley is about to have.
Yep. Ooh. Okay. So, man, I don't like that pick at all. After Blake Wesley, Drew Eubanks, Kai Jones, don't like that. Royce O'Neal, Dennis Smith, who was on my list. Jason took Marcus Sasser. I am just not in on Sasser at all. A small, old point guard who is behind Ivy, Cade, Asar, and Monte Morris for this season. I don't know why Detroit traded up to get him. I don't get it. Bryce McGowan's goes next, and it's now you.
So I have Mike Conley about 75 slots higher on my dynasty rankings than this. So I'm just going to do it for to protect the sanctity and the integrity of this mock draft. And then I'm going to take one for later. And I don't really like Reggie Jackson as the backup point guard in Denver. I think it might be a placeholder for someone that they selected in this draft. We'll see if it ends up working out that early. But I know Calvin Booth, who went to Penn State, really likes Penn State alum Jalen Pickett. And Jalen Pickett has a super interesting fantasy stat set for a small guard. And these are the kinds of guys that you say it and they say, that's a little bit odd. Look at him. He's popping in all these categories that you don't usually see from a guard his size. I'm willing to entertain that. Let's see what happens with Jalen Pickett, because obviously Denver believes in him. They gave him a guaranteed deal. He's going to have opportunity, I think, sooner rather than later to get into that guard rotation if he can prove worthy of it.
What do you make of Maxwell Lewis going ahead of Max Christie?
Well, Christie is likely going to be in the rotation, almost certainly going to be in the rotation for the Lakers this year after they moved on from Malik Beasley and others. I would take Christie above Lewis, Lewis is an interesting kind of toolsy guy. There's not really anything right now that looks like a real NBA player with him. He's just kind of an NBA body with some NBA athleticism who could eventually become an NBA wing. But Christie has real shooting ability, real scoring ability that he demonstrated in Summer League and in some flashes with the Lakers last year, and I think he's a player on the rise in fantasy.
Yeah, I would have taken Christie ahead of him. I probably could consider Christie even 4 or 5 rounds earlier than this. He looked pretty good. He's got a really high block rate for a guard as well. After Christie was Julian Strawther, their first round pick, the Nuggets this season. I just put EJ Liddell on my queue, Alex Burns Hoops. EJ Liddell was a guy that I thought should have been a top 20 pick the year before, then tore his ACL in Summer League. He's maybe a little bit Keita Bates-Diop, who's on my queue here too. Size-wise, is he a 4? Is he a 3? Can he shoot enough? That sort of weirdness, but really good defensive stats coming out of Ohio State as well. Isaiah Joe was on my queue too. They're just sniping me here with guys that I wanted. That's frustrating. I thought those two were definitely going to come through to me for my last couple of picks. I hope that I can get Pig Williams here, because he showed an ability to shoot decently last season, but also his defensive ability, and he was I think he led the league in charges taken, which for a guy that barely played was really interesting. Wow, Jason Wilson. Try again. Jalen Wilson from Brooklyn, a two-way guy, pick 51. I don't see it for him at all. I know he put up summer league numbers, but look at there goes Pig Williams. All right, that's not going to be good for me. What do you think of Jalen Wilson in Brooklyn?
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who does not have NBA athleticism. He was obviously very productive at Kansas, but I don't see how he's going to be able to fit on an NBA floor with that lack of athleticism. Not a particularly strong shooter either. So it's difficult to see him threading the needle to be able to be functioning as an NBA rotation player. I just don't see it.
I don't get it either. But this is, again, I'm just trying to lean into taking guys that I don't like. And at pick 287, I'm not going to let Johnny Davis go any further than that. Like, I know he wasn't very good, but that's an upside flyer for me. Another second-year guy who this happens a lot in dynasty leagues, Matt. I think you'll back me up on this. Is that second-year players, if they don't show anything immediately, their value just drops significantly. Versus if we're talking a rookie draft or a startup last year, Johnny Davis would have gone at pick 80 or something, or pick 130. But like 1 year in, and we forget everything that we thought about them before, even if we thought they were shit. But like that second-year drop is pretty significant.
Yeah, I think it's the kind of the new car syndrome. I mean, the value of a new car is at its peak when it's on the lot. The moment you take it off of it, all of a sudden it drops down. You see this with draft picks. Teams are willing to pay for a draft pick, but once a draft pick becomes a player, it has a lot less value. So Davis will have opportunity this year. Did improve a little bit as the season went on last year. Yeah. Didn't look as bad at Summer League. I think, for the cost of nothing, which is where he's at now, it's at least more interesting than a lot of other guys who are going to be available in this range.
Dorian Finney-Smith went one pick before. When Johnny Davis and Dylan Wright, Dorian Finney-Smith. I took Mason Plumlee. I just needed an extra center. Najee Marshall, and then Lester Quinones, who is on a two-way again. He was very good in Summer League. I don't know how it works in the NBA, but I liked it. And then Adama Sanogo, who I think has the chance to be the most productive two-way player this season. Whether it's G League production or whether it's NBA production, Sanogo I think is a legit NBA player, and I do like that selection of him there. In round 25. Who's your guy that you want to get here with your last pick?
Yeah, so this is a guy that I really love pre-draft. People who looked at my rookie rankings, I had him really high even before the NBA draft occurred because I love the fantasy stat set, and then he went extremely high compared to consensus, again, to the Denver Nuggets here. Hunter Tyson, who looked really strong in Summer League again. The shooting, kind of like Kobe Brown, it maintained from what he did at Clemson, and just looked like an NBA player immediately. So this is a guy who, on a team that is going to be right up against that second apron, is going to be looking for super cheap rotation players, could get an opportunity eventually. So I'm going to take Hunter Tyson and see what happens with this last pick in this mock.
This is a great illustration to me, that draft, so we took Hunter Tyson there, of when we talk about having large dynasty rosters, right? In general, in dynasty, you don't want waiver wire churn, is my idea. But even this, with 300 players rostered, that was pick 300, I think. It was 300. It's 300 that we took? No, it's more than 300. I'm confused. No, exactly 300. Sorry. You took Hunter Tyson at 300. But Kyle Lowry, Chris Dunn, Cam Payne, Kevin Love, Mo Wagner, Patrick Beverley, Chris Boucher, George Niang, Eric Gordon, Malik Beasley, Bates Diop, Watanabe, Marcus Morris, Torrey Craig. These are all rotation players. Grayson Allen's a starter. He's Monte Morris, Nick Batum. These are all available. Like, we probably should have gone 400 deep. So, really, that's what a dynasty is. It's about building a team similar to being an NBA GM and having a lot of guys that aren't available just to be streamed in or out. And there's just so many guys who are available here. We'll go to the draft board overall and we'll have a look at just our squads in general. Matt, do you want to run through your picks starting at pick 1 and we'll go through all of your selections and tell us what you were like most happy about or least happy about?
Yeah, so at number 1, took Nikola Jokić, came back at the end of the second round, taking Anthony Davis, which I really like from an elite fantasy production standpoint at the top of the draft, especially after getting the safety of Jokić at number 1. Came back after the third round reversal at the end of the third to take Jalen Williams, who I thought was a nice value at that point, who I think still has more upside to grow beyond what we saw in his rookie season. And then got Damian Lillard, who had fallen to the top of the fourth round. There's some uncertainty around Dame right now, but I think he's got a number of elite fantasy seasons remaining, and that fits really well with what I was building early on with this team. Came back on the wheel in the 5th and 6th round, getting scoring, getting some of that guard production that can become a little bit more scarce players later on in startups with Jordan Poole and Zach LaVine. So I'm maintaining, not too old of a team. Some older players, Dame obviously past 30, other guys who are closer to 29 and then a little bit younger with Jalen Williams. So giving myself a win now team with also a little bit of a runway to be able to win for a few more years into the future. After that, came back with hoping for the reclamation project on John Collins, and finally dipping into kind of that traditional big man stat set with Jakob Poeltl to be able to secure a starting center with solid fantasy production before they all dried up. Came back after that with 2 picks consecutively with Derek White and Andrew Wiggins, both players who I think will have really strong seasons this year, and at least around the right side of 30 with some productive seasons ahead of them. Then I went a little bit older, skewing with guys who I think will be productive in the immediate season to be able to fill in my bench with guys who can immediately give me production with Terry Rozier and Buddy Hield. They both go well outside of where they were at least producing in past seasons, and I think we could still get a strong season from them this year. And then we kind of started going into a pattern that I like to do in a lot of these drafts and dynasty startups of taking some upside, but also gathering some value from older players who maybe aren't as exciting, who are falling a little bit too far in the draft. So went with Cole Anthony and then Draymond Green. Went with Jared Vanderbilt and Christian Wood as per-minute fantasy producers who have uncertain roles in the upcoming year. And then took Kyle Anderson and Josh Minot, who are the now and later on the Minnesota Timberwolves roster, both of whom I love their per-minute fantasy production. Later on, we'll roll through these quickly, took Steven Adams, Bol Bol, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Kobe Brown, Mike Conley, Jalen Pickett, and Hunter Tyson. Again, the idea, finding guys who you think, if they got to play significant minutes, would become fantasy relevant, even in a 12-team standard league. This is what you need to be doing on the back end of your roster, either finding guys who are going to be immediately productive for you, or if the opportunity strikes, will have the fantasy stat set to have value even in a rotation role. You're probably not going to find the next superstar at the back end of your draft, but the back end of your bench needs to be filled with guys who are either going to help you now, or who, if they get that opportunity, have the fantasy stat set to really jump up in value. Don't take those guys who just end up clogging your roster, who don't really give you any immediate production and don't have any upside to give you anything special in the future. If you're getting guys who are giving you top 150 production and clogging the back end of your bench with that top 200 production, and that's the upside for them, it's not really worth it. Shoot higher or get older guys who can give you a little bit more than that if you're a contending team.
We'll go through my team in a second, but I do have the data here on the average age of each squad. Where would you think your team ranks, Matt?
Based on how everybody drafted and how much age was left, I'm guessing I'm on the lower end of the league. I didn't go super old, but I definitely have more players hovering around 30 than a lot of other rosters.
Yeah, you and Andrew from Angle Fantasy Sports both have the oldest average age at 27 and a half. My team comes in at 25.3, and the youngest is Karan at 21.6, which is by far the youngest. The next youngest is 23.2, which is Jason's team. So he went unbelievably young with that squad, whereas yours is sort of peak, looking to have some upside with younger players, but also do some damage this season. Now, my draft, I started out with Chet at pick 11, Trae Young, Lauri Markkanen, Franz Wagner, Jabari Smith. And part of my idea was, yes, look, taking Chet there, I always want to get some real upside with him, but also guys who are sort of in that pre-prime to prime area, who are going to produce, who can produce that same level, not necessarily going above where they are, but producing that same level of where they're at for the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years, whatever. And I think that's what I got with Trae and with Lauri. There's more upside with Franz, there's more upside with Jabari, but then grab Paul George in round 6, Austin Reeves in round 7, Miles Bridges in 8, then Gafford, McCollum, Pat Williams, and Quentin Grimes. So a mix of upside there. Like McCollum's a downside player, but that gives me something to hang my hat on this season. At round 13, I went Jordy Clarkson. At 14, Cam Thomas. That's similar to what you talked about, like swing for the fence. Like if he hits, he's probably a top 50 player, but it's not likely going to happen. But there is upside in that. Like he's not going to sit around and be a top 200 guy, a best case scenario. After Cam Thomas, it's Kobe White, Sadiq Bey, Ochai Agbaji, Max Strus, Orlando Robinson, a little bit of a swing there for me as a backup center. Norman Powell, Ryan Rollins, that's a swing. G.G. Jackson, Gordon Hayward in round 23, I love. Johnny Davis in 24, and then finishing it off with the cockroach, Mason Plumlee. Matt, I've kept you long enough. That'll get us out of here. Thanks for doing this Dynasty mock draft. Tell everyone what's going on at Fantasy Basketball International with Dynasty startups and Dynasty replacements and how people can be involved in that.
Thanks, Josh. So at Fantasy Basketball International, our home, we have a Discord community where you can find not only constant 24/7 discussion of Dynasty, of season-long leagues, of fantasy values, but also you can find links there to be able to get access to join some of our existing Dynasty leagues, and we should have some Dynasty startups. There are always Dynasty startups being discussed in our leagues openings channel. I might be starting up some new Dynasty leagues in September once we get our existing leagues filled, and you can find all of that in my Twitter profile at NBA Dynasty ADP. You can find my content, the stuff that we provide for free at FBI-basketball.com. And if you want to be able to get the exclusive content that I put out for Patreon subscribers, this is all of my premium Dynasty rankings with over 500 players ranked, my rookie rankings with over 120 rookies, my ADP database going back to 2017 with data. All of that is available at patreon.com/NBA Dynasty ADP. Josh, thank you so much for having me. This is an absolute blast. I love collecting more data. We're going to get this put into the ADP for the next round, along with a bunch of other startups that have been going on. Look forward to doing this maybe next year, and we'll see how smart or stupid we were in making all these selections.
Yeah, we definitely will. You've got 120 deep on your rookie rankings. I went 117. I thought I was going pretty far. Jeez, you've beat me again, Matt. Thanks again for jumping on. Go follow Matt. Go join up at Fantasy Basketball International for all the leagues that they are offering. Thank you once again for coming on, Matt.
Thanks, Josh.
Just a quick shout out to all the people who participated in this draft as well. Obviously, myself and Matt were in here. There was Andrew from Angle Fantasy Sports, Braxton from Angle Fantasy Sports, Noah Rubin from NBC Sports Edge. Sean, it was someone who just jumped in as a listener at the last moment when someone had to pull out. So thank you, Sean Devine, for jumping in. Dynasty Hoops is Dynasty Hoops HQ, which you'll find on Twitter. He does some great work there. Alex Burns Hoops. You've seen Alex who works at NBC Sports Edge as well. Mitch Casey from Ball Boys Fantasy NBA. Jason, who you would have seen on Twitter, I've retweeted his stuff plenty of times. I think his Twitter handle is like DCC Jason. I'm just going to tell you exactly what it is. DBC Jason, sorry. He's a great Dynasty follow over there, DBC Jason. There's Huddy J, which is on Twitter at Ops Watching, another Dynasty analyst. And then Karan Styles of Beyond is a guy that started listening to this podcast and Basketball Monster for years and years and years. He actually won the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl last season and is now doing some Dynasty work in terms of content creation as well. So that's Karan, who went with that really, really young squad. So thank you to everyone who has watched this. And if you're here at the end, congratulations. You want to drop a code word in the comments? Aviator. This is my Las Vegas Aviators minor league baseball hat that I bought in Vegas at Summer League this year. Not at Summer League, but in Vegas. So drop an Aviator in the comments below. Follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app and on YouTube. Thumb it up and leave those sexy comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.